Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. And so today is the 25th, right? Today's 25th, does that make sense? So we're going to cover some additional material in chapter 5. And one of the things that I should mention to you is that we're covering. We're probably not going to get all the way through chapter 3 today because there's a lot going on there that I think it's best to pick up on Monday when we come back. And that is dealing with the topics of consumer and producer surplus and also price controls. Price controls in particular is a relatively lengthy conversation. So I think I'm going to defer that until next week when we come back. So on the 30th, which is Monday, we will tackle that. And then we'll start to push into chapter 4. Chapter 4 really begins the first true macro chapter in this course, and micro chapter, even though I guess you could argue that chapter 3 is really sort of a micro chapter. But it'll be, these first 3 chapters really are sort of introductory to any kind of econ course you'll take. And before we leave, I'll take probably half an hour or 35 minutes, something like that, to talk about the exam, which is going to be available in Brightspace. And I think there's some perhaps a little bit of confusion, but it's early in the semester, which is understandable. The exam is going to be in Brightspace, and it'll be available sometime probably tomorrow. I'm still sort of putting some tweaks and touches on it. So it'll be available tomorrow, probably later in the day, sometime around 6-ish, I would imagine. And then it'll be available all night Thursday, all day Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. So you have until 11:59 p.m. to finish the exam. So, and you should have ample opportunity. You'll have 90 minutes. It's 40 questions. It's not a particularly long exam. It's multiple choice. So there's no essay or short answer or anything like that. And the key thing is just to be prepared. That's really it. And I know when people have difficulties with the time factor, oftentimes it's simply because of the fact that they're searching for answers and whatnot. And I know that that's one of the benefits to people taking the exam is that if it's an open book, open note proposition, you can use those resources, but it doesn't really serve as a crutch to allow, or if it's used to serve as a crutch to not be prepared, then that's an issue. Anyway, that's enough preaching for me. I'm just simply telling you that's kind of the way exams sort of really work. And so next week we'll get into some of the true micro chapters. I don't know if we're going to get to chapter 5, but we'll see how things go. We've got plenty of time in this course in order to deal with that. So when I came in today, I noticed that somebody had made off with a remote. There's a little remote that I swivel the camera. So I had to call AV and figure out how to make this work. And there's apparently a fix to it. So as I'll be kind of moving around a little bit in order to swivel the camera, there's a little bit of a lag and whatnot. So it's a little bit clunky, and I don't know if they're going to replace it or not, but I would presume they are. So anyway, that's just a little bit of an explanation as to why things look a little bit goofy here. Okay. All right. So before we get going, are there any questions for me about anything that we talked about before? Last week, the week before, or anything, or even this week? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started, and then we'll take some time, the last half hour or so, to sort of make some adjustments to we'll talk about the exam and whatnot. So anyway, where we left off last time was we talked about what could cause shifts to supply. And so I'm going to kind of zoom in here a little bit and talk about where the next topic is. And because there's a lag here, I'm sort of overshooting it. So I apologize. I'm kind of doing what I do as I can with this. So you guys here in the classroom don't even know what I'm talking about. The camera's kind of all over the place here. So I'm trying to get this to zoom in a little bit better. And it'd be real nice if people did not take off with stuff, but and I presume it was one of our faculty members that did it. So anyway, so what's the next issue that we should talk about here with regard to putting demand and supply together in its equilibrium? And that is putting both of those functions together. So what is equilibrium? And I'll give you the graphic explanation of this. Equilibrium is defined, and by the way, this slide package is in your Brightspace course site for this week. So what is equilibrium? It's the condition of relative balance or stability in a market as to price and quantity. It's the point at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Now, one thing I want to reiterate that I talked about before, and it goes back to this issue and this potential confusion that sometimes comes up about what supply is, because I think sometimes people get confused in thinking that supply and quantity are one and the same thing. It's easy to do. In fact, in everyday speech, people talk about, maybe on the shelves, for whatever reason, there's a big snowstorm and whatnot, so there's no supply of bread. That's not, we would say there's no inventory of bread, and it's more of a quantity issue than it is supply. Supply is that overall ability and willingness. It's the orientation of the supply side to provide units of goods for sale. Maybe they can't bring those goods for sale for whatever reason, maybe like a big snowstorm or some natural disaster or something is going on. So make sure that you understand that there's a difference between quantity and supply. And in particular, there's a reason why we differentiate quantity demanded with a little D subscript from quantity supplied with an S subscript. And that is the idea that there is a point at which markets will settle into equilibrium. So up to this point, what we've really done here is we've kind of talked about the idea of demand and supply separately. We've said that demand was a downward sloping function, and which can be expressed as a curve or straight line, whichever you prefer. It doesn't really matter for our purposes here. Supply being upward sloping. Well, let's put them together. So typically what we're looking at is a downward sloping demand curve looking something like that. Whether it's a curve or straight line is irrelevant. And by the way, as we get a little bit deeper into the class, we'll see some variations on the slope of this curve, because this looks like it's about 45 degrees down, and then it's met by a 45-degree upward. We're going to see some variations on that. So in case you are looking ahead and saying, wait a minute, all demand curves don't always look the same, just be aware that we are aware that we're going to get to that. So anyway, so think about this. When you talk about quantity, and there's a reason why I sort of harped on this issue of quantity again and again and again. Quantity could be any number of infinite points along this quantity axis, whether it corresponds to demand or supply, because any point that falls along the supply curve or along the demand curve, which are basically approximations of where demand and supply are at a current time. Remember, it's the snapshot that we take. If they correspond to any point that's roughly on that, then they have an ordered, the one part of the ordered pair is along the quantity axis, the other is along the price axis, okay? So what about a condition in which, and so there are cases in which, let's say the price is up here, right? And you've got a condition in which, oops, the equilibrium, the price has no matching point. So you've got a price up here, right? Well, the quantity supplied is here, and the quantity demanded is back here. So you've got a mismatch. And that's not a price that we say does what we call clearing the market. That's not a market clearing price because there's no intersection of demand and supply. And likewise, if you've got a price down here, you've got quantity demanded way out here, quantity supplied way out there. Both of those are out of equilibrium conditions, and I'm going to get to that here in a second. And then when we get into the discussion, probably next week on Monday regarding price control, well, it'll be next week for sure. We'll talk about out of equilibrium conditions that sometimes come about artificially, and that's through government action. But sometimes they're just out of whack because the price is wrong. And I think a lot of times we need to put the burden on sellers to get the price right. Because sometimes I think we look at the price of things and we think the price is just really, really wrong, right? Maybe it's way underpriced, right? And people are just snapping the good up. You got quantity demand way out here because the price is just too low. They've underpriced the good. Or the price is way up here and quantity demand is way back here. People are staying away from it. It's too highly priced. You've got to kind of deal with the price. Instead, what we say is in the short run, you've got this point at which supply and demand can equal themselves. And we arrive at this condition of equilibrium. And equilibrium, we got two main features, and that is equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And in an equilibrium condition, we usually put a little asterisk by the variable that's in equilibrium, which we simply pronounce P star. It's just sort of the convention that we've done in economics forever. And Q star, P star and Q star. P stands for equilibrium price, Q stands for equilibrium quantity. And let's talk about what these are and why equilibrium is important. And by the way, why equilibrium is a naturally occurring phenomenon. And because I know that sometimes there's a tendency for people to think, wait a minute, all you're doing is you're just putting a demand curve that you think ought to be downward sloping and what you think ought to be upward sloping is a supply curve, and just saying, okay, boom, you've got a middle here, and that's where the price is. When in fact, the prices are all over the place sometimes. And we know sometimes prices of some goods are all over the place. We're going to get to that. But we are also saying that we're just taking a snapshot picture of it, right? And there are some markets that are really volatile. And one that comes to mind is anything connected to energy. Oil is up and down. We all know this. I don't need to convince you that oil and its derivatives like gasoline are up and down. We had a nice little respite with gas prices for a few months, didn't we? Now what's going on with gas? It's back up above $3 per gallon, right? It's a very unstable market. A lot of that has to do with these shifts, and I'm going to get into that before we leave today. I'll talk more about that. But what about equilibrium? Is it a real thing or is it just theoretical? And we're going to make the case that it is, particularly since the definition of it as a short term. I guess I should have put the adjective short term there. I think when I reproduced that, I forgot that. So you might kind of write that it's a short run condition of relative balance in a market as to price and quantity. It will change. And one of the things that I mentioned when we were first going over demand and supply is that there's really very few things in economics, maybe nothing really, that's sort of nailed down, that doesn't move because it's fixed in place. It's all moving, it's all sliding around. It's like the kaleidoscope, where not just one thing changes, but a lot of things change. And so equilibrium, again, because all these points on this field here are ordered pairs of P and Q, well, so goes the equilibrium condition of P star and Q star. So what is P star, this equilibrium price here? We would refer to this as what's called a market clearing price. A market clearing price. And let's define what that is by market clearing. And I don't recall whether your textbook has that term, but it's something that I think you should be aware of. Market clearing means there are no surpluses and no shortages. No surpluses, no shortages. And for right now, I will define surpluses and shortages a little bit more concretely here in just a second. So no surpluses and no shortages. I mean, I think we've all heard the term surplus. Surplus means an excess of goods. Shortage means it's a shortage of goods, right? And anybody who's pandemic, all of us, right? We've all, I think, been exposed to shortages for various reasons, and we'll talk about that. And sometimes the shortages are not necessarily out of equilibrium conditions, but these would be conditions of being out of equilibrium when there's a surplus or a shortage. Okay, so a market clearing price means the quantity demand equals the quantity supply, and that's what's really going on here. The equilibrium quantity is the point at which quantity demand equals quantity supply, which is what I've got on the slide presentation there. Okay, so that's what equilibrium is. It's this condition of short-term stability. And the question then, I think, becomes, well, how short-term is short-term? And what is it that you mean by short-term? And I'll give you an economist answer that nobody is going to like, and I'll say, it really depends. I know nobody really likes that answer, but it really depends on the market. It depends on how stable or unstable the market is. Remember, these markets that we're talking about here could be as small as however we drill down into it. Maybe it's the market for snow cones at Isotopes Park, or maybe it's the market for cold desserts everywhere in Albuquerque. I mean, you get the idea. It could be broad geographically. It could be as focused geographically as we're able to get, if we're able to measure it, and we can also include more products in it than things like snow cones. Maybe we include ice cream, maybe we include milkshakes, all that sort of thing. Okay, so that's what equilibrium is. It could be relative stability in a market, and things will change. We know that they'll change because of the fact that they tend to change. So let's do this. Where we left off last time was we were talking about demand and shifts in demand, and talking about supply and shifts in supply. And I want to reiterate something that's important for us to talk about. And I know I mentioned it before, but I think it probably bears repeating, and that's there's a difference between moving up and down along these curves here, because those are due to price changes, and only price changes. But it's another thing when the entire curve shifts to the right or to the left. And again, I like for everybody to think about right and left as opposed to up and down, primarily because with this guy here, a decrease would be to the left, back to the origin, but it will look like it's actually increasing, so that'll confuse you. Or an increase is to the right, and it'll look like it's decreasing. So think right, left. That's the best way to look at it. And if you can associate that with what's going on here, you should be fine. Also, one other thing, I mentioned that there's a mnemonic device that's been used for a long time. You could take it or leave it if you like. Some people like mnemonic devices, some don't, but if ever you wonder, is demand upward or downward sloping? Just think D for demand, D down, D downward sloping. The one for supply is a little goofier, supply to the sky, that sort of thing. So it's upward sloping. Anyway, you can use that whatever if you prefer. That kind of gives you an idea of just what's that.
I was just yawning, sorry.
Oh, sorry. All right. So anyway, so we talked about these shifts. These shifts are due to non-price variables. Okay, non-price variables. And so I want to sort of get into an exercise here of talking about what these shifts can do. Now that we've given a bit of a definition of equilibrium, and give me just a second here because I'm trying to get the camera just right. And obviously, I don't think anybody needs no one's ever going to confuse this with a Hollywood production. So it'd be nice if the camera kind of went this way across the room because I have a better angle to deal with. But I guess we have to deal with what we're dealing with. So the good news is if you're watching, you can kind of stop and whatnot. So let's take a look at what happens to equilibrium here. And the first thing I want to do is sort of model some shifts in demand. So I'm going to have a shift in demand here, shift in demand here, and then down here I'm going to shift into supply, and I shift into supply. And I've already started out by creating the default condition on each PQ plane of D1, D1. In other words, we're going to start with those initial starting points for demand, and then S1, S1 initial starting points for supply in each case. Okay, and we'll talk about what's going on with equilibrium, price, and quantity. And get familiar with this because this kind of methodology, this kind of modeling comes up again and again in this class. The idea that something will shift, something will move. In other words, something has gone on with the equation that is in the background of these particular functions that is moving things. And so those are the things you want to be familiar with. Okay. So, and one other thing is that I know a lot of your textbook will have simultaneous shifts in demand and supply both. And I'm not going to do that here. I just think it sort of confuses the issue because you're introducing too many things, and then it's a matter of which shifted more, supply or demand. So let's start right now with a very basic proposition saying that we've got some equilibrium condition here and some initial equilibrium of P star and Q star. We'll put a little 1 by those, okay? And those of you who had macro before, you will have seen this before in some instance, but you've got some initial change. What if we have a rightward shift in demand, right? So now demand shifts to the right. In other words, it's away from the origin. So it's an increase. And so what happens now to equilibrium? Well, we can expect the equilibrium price to go up. So from P1 to P2, and the equilibrium quantity to also go up. That's, I think, what we would expect to happen in the case of a rightward shift in demand. Due to what? Well, due to the factors that we talked about on Monday, those determinants of demand, those things which are demand shifters. And we said that they're kind of the DNA of demand. Things like number of buyers. It could be simply an increase in the number of buyers. You know, remember, well, up until I guess about the last year or so, real estate prices nationwide have just been rising. Mostly because, you know, you just can't create new houses quickly, but you can create new demand quickly. And people were rushing into the market, they were driving the price of homes up, right? And so as a result, there were more homes being exchanged. Remember, the quantity is goods exchanged, and so more homes were being exchanged, and the prices were going up. Now that has slowed down for reasons that have a lot to do with interest rates and people borrowing money to buy homes. It makes the overall cost go up. But nonetheless, you get the idea. That's one example, just one among many examples of maybe an increase in number of buyers. People are coming into the market, driving the price up. We see this happening even in something that's non-tangible like stocks, right? Whenever you see the stock market going up in price, like you hear on the news, the Dow Jones Industrial Average did this, right? All that is an index of prices. It's just a collection of prices. And what it usually is due to is people rushing in to buy stocks. And there's a limit, and you just don't create more stocks that are floating around out there overnight. They have to be created. It takes a very long process. And so people are rushing in, maybe who are holding cash on Monday, now they're holding stocks on Tuesday, and they're bringing the price up. And that's really, so if you look at the stock market, that would be an example of number of buyers coming in or leaving, whichever the case might be. And again, think about all the other shifters that we talked about. Just go back a couple of slides up, and then we talked about changes in taste and preferences. Something is new in fashion and style. People are rushing in. And what's going on here is that this key thing here is that the prices are being bid up. Prices are being bid up. And by bid up, I don't mean like this is an auction system because frankly, we don't have an economy where too many goods are exchanged in an auction setting. And there are cultures around the world that do that, where people will bid on the price of everything. But we really don't have that sort of thing. Like, what if you went to Walgreens and you saw, I don't know, a bottle of shampoo and it's $4, and you went to the manager and said, "I'll give you $2.50 for this," and he's going to say, "Well, it's $4. Okay, $3." You know, and so you're doing this back and forth over a bottle of shampoo. Sure, it's $4. Okay, really? You go, $3.25, final offer. Take it or leave it. And it's like, well, I'm going to leave it, and you know, it's $4 or it's nothing, whatever. What if you insist? And then it's like, okay, all right, I'll pay you $4. But now what about this hairdryer, right? $25, you must be crazy. I'll give you 10, right? I mean, what happens if you engage in that kind of behavior at Walgreens, or pick the store, pick any place, retail, right? You'll probably be told to get out, right? You can call the cops on you, can go to jail that night, right? But there are cultures in which people do bargain over the price of everything for the most part. And we don't really have those sort of bargaining chops, I guess, if you like, in our society. It just doesn't really happen. And because really, if you think about it, there are really only two goods that the average consumer will ever bargain over the price of. And what are those? There are only two goods, and even then they don't do very. One of the two goods that any consumers will ever bargain over the price of. Let's mention one. Houses. What's the other one? Cars, right? Cars, and there's a lot of evidence people don't do a very good job at doing that. So these prices are what essentially clears the market, and you know, now we're going to get to a bit later in the class talk about the cases in which sometimes firms will charge different prices to different buyers. Let's hold off that discussion a bit later, because right now this is a better way of looking at this whole idea. Okay, increase in demand, bidding the price up. Well, what if we go the other direction? Again, we're going to take demand shifts on the top panel here. So we've got an equilibrium condition we'll call P1, Q1. And now what happens, let's say we have demand going the opposite direction. Where demand was D1, now demand shifting to the left. In other words, back toward the origin. So it's a decrease in overall demand due to whatever. Maybe it's well, let's take different factors here. It could be a reduction in income, right? And as a result, there's going to be less quantity exchanged, and it's going to get done at a lower price. People are leaving this, demand side is leaving the market for whatever reason. Fewer buyers, tastes and preferences have changed. Maybe this is a good that is now being replaced by a substitute. So demand for this good is on its way out. And so as a result, the price will fall, right? We see this happening with goods that are, well, there's just not very much demand for, and as a result, the price goes for very, very low prices indeed. You know, sometimes you'll see them, they'll make their way around the world a couple times and end up in big lots, and they'll sell for some nominal amount just to kind of get rid of it somewhere. That's an extreme case, but nonetheless, you get the idea that demand can leave, maybe because of tastes and preferences or incomes are falling. We're starting to see this back to our real estate example with residential real estate. Demand is not really there, and prices of real estate are beginning to fall. And this is what really touched off the last economic crisis we had, was the idea that people were backing out of the side of the market. Prices were falling, and people owed a lot more than what the homes were worth. And they were just simply walking to the mortgage company saying, "Here are the keys, the house is yours," etc. And that's not a very good outcome. Okay. This would be an example of demand shifting, going to the left, and the resulting effect on equilibrium. And again, you'll be asked in the exam a couple of cases about something like this. And so it's useful to be familiar with what's going on here in terms of this. Okay. All right. So those are demand shifts on the top curve here. What about on the top panel? What about if we go down here, we've got S labeled as S1. So it must mean that we're going to be shifting supply. We are. And let's just keep the same methodology going here with a rightward shift. And again, think right left, because this looks like it's decreasing, but it's actually increasing. And you've now got a rightward shift in supply. It's increase in overall supply for all kinds of reasons. Increase in the number of sellers, right? Or it could be a reduced cost of production. For whatever reason, maybe it costs less to do whatever it is that you're doing. Over time, as we adopt new technology, we see supply curves shift to the right, shift to the right, shift to the right, because as we mass produce goods, and we're going to get into this a bit later, it costs so much less to produce massive quantities of goods. I mean, what do you think it costs to make a pack of cigarettes? Not what the price of a pack of cigarettes is, which I don't know, what is it? What do cigarettes cost? $7, $8 a pack, something like that. Anybody smoke? I haven't smoked in a while, but what do you think it costs to make a pack of cigarettes? To produce a pack of cigarettes, get it on the shelf at 7-Eleven. What do you think it costs? $9 or $10 per pack. It's a lot less, mostly because it's just mass production through technology, frankly. And as a result, the supply curves will shift to the left. And what happens is more quantities exchanged as more supply is coming online. So the Q goes up and it goes at a lower price. Okay. So this is an increase in supply. And this is something that I think makes sense to us, or should make sense to us, than the idea that as more quantity, more supply is available, more suppliers, more goods available, the price comes down. Think about this. It seems to me, and I know my wife and my son like pizza a lot, and it just seems like the price of pizza, there's like this price war that's been going on for a while now. And it seems like the price of pizza is a little bit less than what it used to be. I don't know if I'm reading that right or not, but it just seems like there's a lot more suppliers than what there used to be, a lot more competition, and as a result, the price gets driven down. And I think that might be what is happening in some cases. Okay, not always. And I know that right now we've got an inflationary condition going on, sort of macroeconomically, but which will sort of force it up in the other direction for different reasons. But nonetheless, this is the effect of increased number of sellers, lower cost of production, maybe lower taxes, whatever. Okay, that's the effect of a rightward shift in supply. What about a leftward shift in supply? Let's just go ahead and model the original equilibrium condition of P1. Because it's an equilibrium, we'll put a little asterisk by it. So what if now we have a reduction in supply? S goes from S1 to S2. In other words, back toward the origin. It's a decrease. And remember, don't think about up, down, think right, left. This is a decrease in supply. And so as a result, what happens? There's less quantity exchange because, well, what could it be due to? Reduced number of sellers in a market, higher cost of production, maybe wage costs are going up, and the goods are going at a higher price because there's less quantity, or there's less supply available, so less quantities exchanged, and they happen at a higher price. Any kind of a condition in which maybe it could be the cost of production is rising. It could be, remember when we talked about the shifters of supply, we said that there's one that is sort of superior and it's sort of overriding in importance to really all the others, and that's the cost of production. And realizing, of course, and I want to reiterate this, and it's something you're going to get tired of hearing me say, but there's a difference between cost and price. Cost refers to the internal cost of producing a good and getting it to market. Again, the term good being used as a euphemism for goods and services. That's cost. Price is the price at which is the exchange value of the good itself. Okay. And ideally, if you're a seller, at least, ideally, the price should be greater than the cost, right? The cost per unit. Otherwise, what is it you're doing? And you're probably going to have to rethink what it is you're doing because it doesn't even particular thing. Okay. All right. So those are some shifts. And again, we could go and really belabor this an awful lot and talk about lots of different sorts of combinations of things here. But I think it's probably not that productive for us to do it, particularly this idea of, getting into, the multiple shifts and whatnot, of multiple shifts in demand, multiple shifts in supply and whatnot. So one thing I want to do here, this will be sort of the last topic. And again, I mentioned at the beginning of class that we're not going to be covering consumer surplus and producer surplus, because I'd really rather pick that up after we do the price control discussion. Your book has gotten the opposite order. They get into consumer and producer surplus, and they get into price controls, I think. I think that's the order, but I want to do price controls first because these are out of equilibrium conditions that are set artificially. But I'm not going to have time, and as I've said before, I really want to stick to the schedule, make sure we have our exam on time so that everyone knows when it's happening. I just kind of think that it makes a lot more, our students are busy, frankly. You've got lives to do, and if you know you're going to have an exam at the end of week 3, I think you need to be able to it might be nice if you could plan that so that you're able to take the exam in week 3 rather than be blindsided with the instructor changing things up, which is not to say that things may not happen. down the road that are unforeseen, like snowstorms or whatnot. But right now, we'll just assume that we are going to be on track for the rest of the semester. Okay. Okay. Well, we have got this condition. Are there questions about these these shifts? Anybody on the Zoom call want to ask a question? And you can give me a shout out here, or you can put something up in the chat box. Let me see here. There are some notes. Somebody put in the chat box. Do we need to put our names? Not in chat, but if you could, 2 ways to record your attendance if you're watching it live. You can name, or you can go into the attendance link in Brightspace saying, "Hey, I was at class," or whatever. Don't make a big deal of it. You don't really have to. But if you do sign in, you might want to put your name, because I know sometimes people will put like a nickname or maybe just the first name, and we've got maybe 2 Michaels or 3 Marys or whatever, and it's, I don't know who's who. So that's how you want to do that. Okay, I wouldn't make a big deal over the attendance link. Okay, so questions about that. Last thing I want to talk about is out of equilibrium conditions, and this is going to be a pretty good jumping off point for where we're going to go on Monday after the exam. And that is this idea of out of equilibrium conditions. And even though on the slide package, I went ahead and put some information on its consumer surplus and producer surplus and whatnot, it really does go with chapter 3, but we lost a little bit of time. We're running a little bit behind from probably due to the holiday. No big deal. We'll catch up. So what about equilibrium conditions? Well, out of equilibrium conditions are conditions which the market is not in equilibrium. It is not a condition of short-term stability as to price and quantity, and there are 2 elements of this, shortages and surpluses. And let me just go ahead and model this right now so that, wrong way, so that we know what those look like, okay? So let's do this, and I'm going to put this over on this board here. So I'll make it kind of big here so we can see this. So we talked about before where we've got a PQ plane, right? And we're going to be coming back to this particular model again and again and again and again, okay? And you got a downward sloping demand curve, D down, upward sloping supply curve, supply to the sky kind of deal right here, right? Well, we know an equilibrium condition is the intersection of demand and supply, right? But what about when we have a condition where, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit a second ago, the price for whatever reason has gotten itself up here. Equilibrium price is down here, right? But for some reason, the price is set up here for whatever reason. And frankly, I think a lot of times these reasons are because not really understanding what the correct price is. And I'm not, launching some broadside attack on sellers in general. I'm just saying it does happen where firms misprice their product. And when they misprice their product, the demand side oftentimes reacts negatively. And sometimes we see this happening in a big way. Look at what Twitter just did with this introduction of what was like $8 a month for some sort of premium thing. And then the market said, what? No, we're not going to pay that. So they took it away right away. That's an example of the supply side mispricing a product. When they get it wrong, they misprice it. Well, so think about this. Why is it mispriced? Because the quantity demanded falls back to here while the quantity supplied is out here. So the quantity demanded is here, quantity supplied is out here. So the difference between these 2 points, this interval here, is this condition of a surplus. It's a surplus. It's a condition where the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied. Or you could phrase it just the opposite way, which I said here is quantity. Yeah, I put it the same way on the slide. Quantity demanded is less than quantity supplied. Okay, and all you're simply saying here is that the fact is the quantity demand side is unimpressed with that particular price. So what has to happen? What has to happen? Sellers would love to charge this price, right? And be able to sell this quantity, but the demand side is not going to go along with it. So what happens is you've got a surplus. The surplus is unsold product, right? So what does any seller do to get rid of its product? It drops the price and drops the price and drops the price until it arrives at a condition in which, as that price comes down, then you also see a walking this way of quantity demanded until you get back to something like equilibrium. And equilibrium doesn't have to be a perfect balance. You can have a small shortage or a small surplus. But one of the explanations for why equilibrium is justified beyond just theoretical is just think about your own existences. I mean, how many times you go to, I don't know, a grocery store or a drugstore and you just find goods just spilling out over the shelves and just, tumbling out, and you're stepping over boxes and whatnot. I mean, you might when they're stocking and whatnot, but we're not talking, but I'm talking about just an overflowing of goods. It's not very often. Likewise, you rarely go to the store and see just complete shelves just wiped out, you might see it during some unusual event like a natural disaster or whatnot, or I mean, just something really weird. Even the pandemic, we didn't really see total wipe out of shelves. We saw some goods being wiped out, but not just a wholesale, clearing of goods. And so what happens is it's usually the seller that will recognize that the demand side is staying away, and they get the message the price needs to come down. And the supply side does get the message, and they get the message pretty quickly. This is what needs to happen. And very often, I think it's really it's simply a management decision. And one of the things that I think makes microeconomics very useful for those who go on to study in a business program is that we often talk about the idea of management decisions, which is why micro is really sort of fundamental to a lot of what we do in business in general, because we talk about this idea of making decisions based upon imperfect information. We think this is a good price. Well, it's not the right price. It's the wrong price. And so as a result, we need to make a change, and sellers will make that change. Okay, so that's the condition of surplus. What about the opposite condition, the condition of a shortage? And so here, you've got a price down here for whatever reason. Remember, the equilibrium price, that is the market clearing price, is there. And we know it because we got a little star by it. But what about a price down here? And who knows why the price is there? But the quantity demand really likes that a lot. You've got quantity demand out here, but the supply side doesn't like that low price. So as a result, you've got an interval between here and here. This quantity, whatever this distance here is a shortage. And that is the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. And so the shortage is the difference between those 2 points along the quantity axis. And that is the shortage, where you've got, it's usually a function of price. The price is too low. And what's really interesting about this, this particular discussion now is, since we have now come out of the pandemic and we saw lots of shortages of things like Clorox bleach and Clorox, the little wipey things that were missing from shelves for a long time, is the idea that people were just absolutely dialing up their demand decisions, really in an extreme way. And the supply side just couldn't catch up. This is really what for the average person out there, I think a lot of people probably had not really heard of, or I mean, if they've heard of, they didn't know what it was. The idea of supply chains, and supply chains just could not catch up with where the quantity demand was. And so that was sort of people were freaking out buying toilet paper and Clorox and all these things and just really going crazy. And by the way, the evidence for the fact that the price was low is that people were doing what? They were buying those Clorox wipes and then doing what with them? They were reselling them, weren't they? They were putting them on the internet and selling them for $10 and whatnot. And were people paying them? Yeah, somebody was willing to pay it. So that kind of tells you the price is too low, and therefore you've got a shortage. And sometimes when the price is too low, then the demand side takes matters into their own hand, and they did into their own hands. And they did that in that case. They were reselling those goods. By the way, this is the entire logic of ticket scalping, where you've got in the short run, a relatively fixed supply of tickets. And yet there are people willing to pay a higher price. And so if people can get their hands on enough tickets, they can mark the price up to something that's more akin to the equilibrium price to find those buyers who are willing to pay it. And that's why ticket scalping, a lot of economists think in the places that it's illegal, it should be illegal because it's really the natural functioning of the market. And I've asked classes this for a long time. I don't know that anyone's ever really told me is ticket scalping legal in Albuquerque or is it illegal? Does anybody know the answer to that? Because in some places it's illegal. I think in Phoenix it's illegal because I think I was going to my wife and I were going to a baseball game. There was a ticket scalper who saw like a policeman roll up. He kind of took off like he was selling drugs or something, and all he was selling was baseball tickets. And in some places it's considered illegal because I don't know for whatever reason it is. But and I know the college town where I went to school, it was illegal, and it was this underground activity where if you wanted basketball tickets, you had to find a connection. It was like the underground market. It's kind of a weird thing because it's not like these are harmful goods. Like we're trafficking drugs or guns. It's tickets, seats to a sporting event. But anyway, you get the idea. Ticket scalping works because the price is set too low for whatever reason. So as a result, people want to pay a higher price. But this is an out of equilibrium condition. And what happens to cure that particular condition? Well, if you're a seller, and again, I put a lot of this burden back on the seller. If you're a seller and goods are flying off the shelves, you do what? You raise the price of your product, right? And as you do that, the quantity demanded will fall back until you eventually arrive back at equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So then you sell back into that price. It is a rule of thumb for those of you who will go on to study, further courses in business, that it's sort of it's almost like a rule where if people are banging down your door to get your product, you need to raise the price. And if you can't keep up with demand, keep raising the price, keep raising your price, keep raising your price. Because why not? Right? If they're banging on your door, goods are flying off shelves, you should be raising the price of your product, right? Okay. All right. So questions about out of equilibrium conditions. Okay. Well, I think that sort of does it. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time and I'm going to talk about the exam. So if anybody wants me to create any graphs or any kind of equations, let me know. I'm more than glad to do that. All I'm going to do now, really, I got about a half an hour left, is I want to talk about the exam, what to expect, and what it's going to look like. So you're going to have 90 minutes to space, and how you get there is you go to the course site in Brightspace, coursework, and you've got two ways to get to it: coursework and quizzes. That's one way. It's not a quiz; it's an exam. It's under quizzes, or just go to the week, where you see the slides and the attendance, where you see slides and you see the recorded videos. That's another way. I'll post it there as well. So it'll be the same exam, but it'll just be two different ways to get there. Okay, so it'll be available sometime on Thursday. You'll have 90 minutes to take it. 40 questions. So I don't think it's going to be really that extreme. I think it should be relatively straightforward. And for those of you who've had an econ course before, a lot of people who've had taken macro before, and so in that case you probably will be familiar with a lot of the content in this case, but if you haven't before, don't worry about it, because you'll be able to use whatever resources are available for you. So all right, so let's talk about it'll be all multiple choice, so you can take it in Brightspace. And by the way, I think I mentioned this some time ago. If you want to take it in class, let me know. I know that we don't have a class again this week, so if you want to take, let me just say, if you want to take it on paper or on campus, I can send it to the testing center. You can take it there. I know some people would prefer to do that. The vast majority, in my experience, maybe I'm making an assumption that you all would rather take it online, but that's been my experience. And if you don't, it's no problem. You don't have to make a big deal of it. I'll just make it available to you. Some people like to have pieces of paper. That's fine. You can still use your notes, use your exam. Use whatever you want to use. It's perfectly fine to do. Okay. All right. So what about the exam here? What are we looking at? So just as an example, what we're looking at. So you want to know about first of all, you want to look at your notes that you've taken from class. You want to look also at the slides that I've posted on these are all PowerPoint slides. Again, chapter 3 will cut off just at this out of equilibrium condition of shortages and surpluses. There won't, even though chapter 3 in the readings will cover price controls and consumer and producer surplus, we just don't have time to cover it here, so we're not going to get into that. Okay. So but what is the difference between micro and macro? Just know what the basic difference is. This is something we talked about day one of class. What is the difference? Macro being the big picture view of economics, micro being essentially, to put it briefly, the study of markets. So it's slices of the economy. Okay. Also, there are a couple of questions dealing with this idea of economic statements. And that's the idea of positive statements and normative statements. And remember what those statements are. We said that in economics, a positive economic statement is a statement of what is or what are, depending upon the tense. Statement of what is, if I said something like unemployment is 3.5%, which it is, it's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. That's, so the term positive doesn't imply good or bad. What if I said it's 15%? That's probably almost nobody would say that's good, but it's a statement of what is. Okay. Okay, so it's a positive statement. A normative statement is a statement of what should be. If I said unemployment should be 5%, which is better than 15%, then it's a statement of what I think should happen. Or if I think all the banks should be nationalized, then we should make every bank like a regulated utility, like P&M or the water company, right? Where we set the fees and we set the rates, and everybody has access to it. And banks. That is a normative statement, involves the word should. That's sort of a tip-off. That would be a controversial statement. I know a lot of people would not like that event, that we nationalize the banks. That is, we socialize banking. It's been done in other places, and so if there's precedent for it, but that would be a statement that is controversial. But again, I think I made clear when we talked about normative statements that they are by definition controversial, and so not everyone's going to agree, and that's just part of the deal. Okay. Let's see here. Well, there are a couple questions dealing with the circular flow model, and remember that. And there's a good illustration in your text. And it's an illustration that's not too complicated either, because sometimes you get these circular flow models, and I think I mentioned in class that they just go, it's just so much detail, it just almost drowns out, almost you lose the forest for the trees. But just know who the actors are. You have three actor groups, right? Households, firms, and governments. And know that there are two basic flows that are going on. There's a flow of goods there's a flow of goods and labor, we call the physical flow. In the opposite direction, there's a money flow of wages and spending. Wages and spending. So the goods flow is reciprocated for by spending. The labor flow is reciprocated for by wages. One is a financial flow, the other is, or a money flow, the other is a physical flow, sometimes called the real economy. So just know what's going on there. I try to give you the most model that I can come up with for that. And we may add bits and pieces to it. As we get a little bit deeper in the class, we'll sort of modify this idea of the goods flow to include businesses buying from other businesses. We haven't really done that yet, but that'll be an example. So there'll be a couple questions about that. And as to these actors, know who the actors are: households, firms, and governments. Know that households and firms together constitute what we call the private sector. And what do we say about the private sector? It's not an industry, it's just simply a division of actors. And the private sector acts in their own self-interest. Whereas the public sector, which is government and everything with it, acts in the public interest, or at least theoretically is supposed to act in the public interest rather than any private interest. Now that doesn't always happen, obviously. That is the objective. Okay. All right. I don't know if we're getting the captioning. I don't think the captioning is working today. I see what I'm saying here, but well, maybe it is. Oh, it's coming through on a transcript. Okay, maybe I want